so much to Optimal for inviting Anne-Marie and I to talk with you today. So as Catherine said, please feel free to scan the QR code and submit your questions. We have an hour and a half today to talk and share and answer questions. So we'll have some time at the end to be able to answer all of your burning questions, and hopefully we'll be able to do a good job with that. As we are starting today, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Hogan. For those who are not, Hogan Assessments is a global publisher of personality assessments and assessment-based workplace solutions. The work we do solves talent problems common to all organizations. In the nearly 40 years since our founding, we have amassed performance data for most jobs in the global economy, and our partners like Optimal Consulting represent our brand in the global markets. And we have assessment products available in 54 different languages. As you may know, Optimal works across mainland China, Hong Kong, Japan, Malaysia, and Singapore, offering wonderful service across East and Southeast Asia. So if you have any specific questions about some of the solutions we're presenting today, feel free to reach out to Optimal and the team. We've worked with Wanling since 2006, so they're a wonderful partner for us here in the region. Hogan also provides premium assessment-based solutions for making decisions about people. Our core assessments solve problems that are common to all organizations. We have safety solutions, high potential identification, leadership development. We have performance data for most jobs in the global economy. And our assessments help individuals, teams, and more importantly, organizations across the world. Today, as we're talking, we know we talk a lot about individual self-awareness, individual solutions, but today we would love to present more organizational solutions. So as you start implementing personality across your organization, across your leadership development programs, it will actually help solve some of the gender inequality that may be there. So personality isn't just a one-on-one solution. Personality assessment can be used to help solve broader organizational solutions. So that's something we'd also like to share today. Anne-Marie, would you like to share more about the specific assessments Hogan has?
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Hogan, we offer 3 core personality assessments that help organizations gain valuable insights into the behavior, the potential, and the effectiveness of leaders. And we like to look at this as like the full spectrum of leader personality. So our first assessment, the HPI, focuses on the bright side of personality. These are the characteristics that describe how people behave on a day-to-day basis. It really gives us insight into how individuals approach work and build relationships and handle challenges or solve problems. Then we have its counterpart, the HDS, who looks at the dark side of personality. This assessment captures the potential derailers that may show up under stress or pressure when people are not self-monitoring. So these are characteristics that are kind of overused strengths. They're not always negative, but they can impact performance if they're not managed. And last, we have the MVPI that reveals what motivates people and what values drive their decisions. This assessment is really a deep dive into understanding what someone finds fulfilling at work and in life, and it helps us understand what type of culture an individual will thrive in and what type of culture they will want to create as a leader if they're in a leadership role. And so together, these assessments really give a holistic view of a person's personality, from their strength to their potential risk to what drives them. So whether you're hiring, developing leaders, or wanting to build a high-performing team, we really have the best tools to provide you the insights that you need to make data-driven, bias-free, informed decisions to build your organization and deliver on its objectives.
So as we start today, I would like to, especially with this topic, talk about a person who is very important to Hogan Assessments. When people think of Hogan Assessments, many people automatically think of Dr. Robert Hogan. Many of you maybe have heard of him or even seen him speak. He's been out to Asia and to Optimal's markets, to Singapore, several times. But there is actually another Dr. Hogan who was integral in founding Hogan Assessments, and that's Dr. Joyce Cummings Hogan. She passed away in 2011, but her impact on the business was so strong and has made Hogan the global company and high quality brand that we are today. Dr. Joyce Hogan was a prolific personality psychologist, a psychometrician, as well as the co-founder of Hogan Assessments with Dr. Robert Hogan. They were married. Her background was actually in human performance, but the work she did was instrumental in opening doors for women to join traditionally male-dominated fields. She is actually credited with changing the selection process for the San Francisco, California Fire Department, which allowed the first women firefighters in America in the 1980s. She also worked with branches of the military and law enforcement agencies to disprove commonly held beliefs about the physical limitations of women. She preferred to stay behind the scenes and let others manage the PR aspects of the Hogan business. So she wasn't in the forefront like Dr. Robert Hogan is, but it is really important to recognize her contributions, which have made the world a better place. This photo here is actually Joyce climbing a telephone pole while working with Southern Bell. Southern Bell was one of the first clients that Hogan ever had in the US back in the 1980s and 90s. They helped build our company. The expectation at the time was that women weren't capable of climbing poles. Actually, they just made a slight modification to the harness, and then women were able to climb poles and do the same work as men for field work at the telephone companies. Joyce's legacy is key to the core foundational values of Hogan Assessments. She challenged the limits set by the establishment and pushed the boundaries for gender equality by bringing attention to performance and the economic benefits of equalizing the playing field for women. And these are some themes that we'll continue to talk about today. It's not just about gender equality, it's about how it can actually make the world a better place by giving people equal opportunities to perform well. So Joyce saw an opportunity to level the playing field by revising selection tests to be more equitable and allow high performers equally to rise to the top. Additionally, she served as an expert witness for the U.S. Department of Labor and Justice on key gender discrimination cases that paved the way for women in male-dominated fields such as law enforcement, firefighting, and heavy industry. Her work also has paved the way for greater equality in women in leadership roles, and we'll talk more about that today. Some other notable contributions is that she worked with the U.S. Naval School to identify and reduce cases of attrition in divers tasked with dismantling and disposing live explosives on the ocean floor. She was very, very hardcore. She and Dr. Robert Hogan worked with the TSA in the US after 9/11 to develop a screening for airline safety officers who were deputized as federal law enforcement officers as a last line of defense against terrorism. She was also the first director of the women's athletics program at Johns Hopkins University, where she was also a professor. She was a nationally ranked squash player. She was a prolific author of technical reports, articles, and book chapters, including publishing in top-tier professional journals. A lot of the work that we do today is based on Joyce's work. She was the editor of Human Performance, which publishes research investigating the nature and role of performance in the workplace. She was an accomplished academic and scholar, first as an adjunct assistant professor of psychology at Johns Hopkins University, where she met Dr. Robert Hogan, and as a professor of psychology at the University of Tulsa, where she helped develop a PhD program in the IO psychology department. So Joyce set the tone for Hogan's company culture. We work hard, we play hard, and we do the right thing. And the benefit of all of that means more equality for everyone and higher performance for organizations. So this is how I'd love to set the tone for today as we are talking about gender equality. Hogan, when you think of Hogan, hopefully you won't only think of Dr. Robert Hogan, you will also think of Dr. Joyce Cummings Hogan, who was so important and really was a partnership. So that's how actually Hogan got our name. So today, let us start by talking about the current state of women in leadership. Understanding a baseline of where we are today will help us know how we can improve and how we can go forward. So, back in the 1970s, women thought that progress was finally being made. Dr. Joyce Hogan set the foundation for a lot of the good work and a lot of the progress we've made today. Also, our mothers were out there burning bras and demanding equality, and this has led to significant progress over the last several decades. But unfortunately, we have not come nearly as far as our mothers and grandmothers thought we would. The gender gap is still quite large. Globally, less than a third of leadership roles are held by women. In the US, the number of CEOs in the Fortune 500 has finally passed 10%, or 52 women, but this number has held steady for the past several years, experiencing no improvement. Across Asia, we see a wide variance in the rates of women in leadership. Singapore actually has some good statistics, an overall proportion of 42% of women in senior leadership roles. However, we're only seeing about 13% of women as CEOs as late as 2023. Vietnam also surprisingly has a great statistic of 33% of women senior executives. When I asked a woman in Vietnam about this, an executive woman in Vietnam, she joked that it was only because all of the men are lazy and don't want to take positions of leadership. But she seriously shared that still, even with good statistics of women in leadership, women still have a difficult time maintaining equality in the workforce and moving past some of these myths that we're going to talk about today. Japan is one of the longest developed countries in Asia, but has one of the lowest rates of women in senior leadership position. Only 8.4% of company presidents are women, and out of the top 1,600 listed companies in Japan, only 13 CEOs are women, so not even 1 percentage point. So one important thing to see is that while more women are in the workplace, we're seeing about 46% of people actually entering the workplace around the globe. As women progress in their careers, we see a significant decline in women in management and executive roles. Even for industries in which women make up the majority of the workplace, we see this drop to the top. Women are still struggling to reach the highest levels within the organizations. Industries like healthcare, education, consumer services, and retail, where typically more women tend to join, still are not maintaining those positions of leadership. So notably, these are also industries with lower average salaries. One thing to note from the World Economic Forum report is that globally, the gender gap is much smaller in other areas like levels of education. So this actually indicates that the reasons women are being excluded from leadership roles are not matters of qualification because they have equal educational qualification. So we have to look at some other factors here. So most people intuitively know that gender equity is a good thing. And as Catherine mentioned, the data are actually clear that diversity in leadership is beneficial to organizational performance. Companies with women on executive committees achieved 47% higher return on equity compared to those without. And organizations in the top 25% for gender diversity are 27% more likely to outperform their industry average in profitability. Companies in the bottom 25% for gender diversity were significantly less likely to see higher profits than their national industry average. Gender diverse firms have shown consistent outperformance over time, with studies like Morgan Stanley's HERS ranking confirming that diversity correlates with better share price performance. Governments are also starting to recognize this too. Japan has set a goal of having 30% women in executive roles at the top listed companies by 2030. They have some work to do. It's quite a little bit of ways to go, but they're recognizing the importance of gender diversity for performance. Vietnam actually has a requirement that 35% of their electoral candidates for the government are female. And Singapore, Philippines, and Tajikistan are all approaching 30% rates for women in leadership roles, which is beneficial for the economies of those nations. So we're seeing all of this recognition that diversity is good, but what can we do about it?
And yeah, as Krista pointed out, the business case for including women in leadership role is quite clear, with numerous benefits for organizations. And as Krista also highlighted, over the past 70 years, we've made significant progress. And more studies are now showing that women are no longer viewed as less competent than men. However, there are still some stereotypes that remain deeply ingrained in people's mind. For example, we still see headlines questioning the psychological traits or capabilities of women and whether they affect leadership performance in the same or different ways as those men. And having, Hogan having spent 40 years in the business and leadership research field, we thought, why don't we take a closer look at these enduring stereotypes and examine whether they are facts or myth? And this is how basically this study was born. This is a study that we did at the end of 2024, and we first presented those results at the Women in Leadership Summit in Auckland, but we will be expanding a lot more than what we presented on last year. We also presented these results at SciUp, and every time we present this study, people find it super interesting and very insightful. So basically, what we did is we did a literature review and looked at what are some of the most common beliefs that people still hold, or some of the questions that people still have regarding women versus men in leadership roles. And so these are the ones that we'll be looking at. Are women as ambitious as men? Can they handle the high stress of a leadership role? Are women as decisive or as ready to take risk as men? Are they more or less strategic or innovative than men? And one that we still hear quite often today is should women adopt masculine leadership characteristic or act like men in order to be able to succeed? So this is our geeky slide, and as the scientist representative in this webinar, this is our geeky slide and basically our methodology. So we had 2 research questions to look at those myths. We not only wanted to see if men and women executives differed in their personality characteristic, but also if these personality characteristics would also predict leadership effectiveness in the same way or differently for men versus women executives. And as Krista mentioned, Hogan, and not only Krista, Catherine as well, you mentioned that Hogan has tons of data. And so we have a lot of archival data sets that we could leverage in order to answer these questions. So the first one, we looked at our global data set of personality and values for men and women executives. We also had some supervisor ratings on the Hogan competency models, and also additional data containing 360 performance ratings that we could leverage. And so I won't go into too much details regarding that. If you have any questions about our methodology, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll start to deep dive into each of these fact or myth.
So the first myth we are going to look at and hint We're already telling the answer by telling you it's a myth, right? Women are not as ambitious as men. This is absolutely a myth. So first of all, let's define ambition. As Hogan defines ambition, it's the degree to which one seems socially self-confident, leader-like, competitive, and energetic. And so we may, as we're thinking about these myths, think about where they come from. It is a fact, as I've presented earlier, that there are less women in leadership roles than men. And so as we're thinking about this, that could be where the myth comes from. Oh, women aren't as ambitious as men because they don't have as many positions of leadership. In fact, many women in top executive positions have shared stories about this myth. So Sheryl Sandberg, the former COO of Facebook, for example, has written in her book, Lean In, about how despite her high-ranking position, some people felt she wasn't as ambitious or competent as her male peers. And this was the COO of Facebook, a huge organization. Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, also shares this sentiment. She has shared how she often had to work twice as hard to prove her ambition and capabilities. She has said that she has faced skepticism about her ability to balance her role as a leader with her responsibility as a mother. So this is something that people have a perception about, but it simply isn't true. Our research shows that women are just as ambitious as men. And so if you see here, there is an effect size of D equals 0.1, but the overlap between genders would be over 92%, meaning that the difference would be barely perceptible in real world scenarios. This effect size is similar to core body temperature gender differences. So women may have a very slightly higher core body temperature on average than men, but the difference is typically minimal. It doesn't really make a difference in the real world. So societal expectations, workplace cultures, and structural barriers, AKA maybe the lack of sponsorship, maybe biased promotion criteria, maybe a system that's always promoted people who look like themselves, often suppress how ambition is expressed in leadership roles. So Indra Nooyi has actually encouraged women to own their ambition and not shy away from asserting their goals because she recognizes there is a bias against it. Additionally, Carol Tomey, who was one of the few women CEOs of a Fortune 500 logistics company, successfully led her company through the COVID crisis. She has highlighted that ambition is not just about personal drive, but also about willingness to take risks, seek opportunities, and advocate for oneself. And so she addresses the importance of mentorship and support networks for women in business, saying that these are so important for fostering ambition and growth and helping women achieve the positions of leadership that we know they can achieve because women are just as ambitious as men.
Moving on to our second myth. It's not true that women can handle the high-stress leadership roles. Well, our data doesn't suggest that it's due to an individual characteristic or an individual factor. So on the one side, we know that there are some factors that may explain why some people still believe this. In recent years, we've seen a few headlines about women leaders reporting the highest levels of burnout in the workforce. The media has also turned our attention towards some really impressive women leaders stepping down from very important roles, which could lead the general population to doubt whether or not women can handle the high stress associated with an executive roles. On the other hand, nothing in our data suggests that women executives don't have the intrinsic capabilities of handling high-stress leadership roles. So let's walk through that together because we had multiple data points to explore or kind of fact check whether if this was a fact or myth. So the first thing that we looked at is our executive scores on the adjustment scale on the HPI. So the HPI adjustment scale measures the degree to which someone appears confident, self-accepting, and stable under pressure on a day-to-day basis. So on this scale, as you can see, we find no differences on emotional stability between men and women executives, and this personality characteristic equally supports their performance for both genders. Next, we looked at the excitable scale, which is one of the scale on the HDS, the measure of the dark side of personality. This scale measures the degree to which someone appears as emotionally explosive, moody, easily upset, or pessimistic when they're stressed. And again here, we don't see any differences between women and men executives, and being able to handle stress and being able to kind of contain and not be emotionally volatile is equally important for both. So when women executives and men executives show emotional volatility, it will hinder their performance equally for both gender. So basically, too much emotional displays, especially negatively charged emotion, is detrimental to all executives, and both men and women are as likely to be emotional under stress. Last, we looked at our competency criterion data set. So this data set is composed of supervisors' ratings of executives' job performance across various competency. And one competency that we measure is handling stress. So here again, we don't find any differences between women executives and men executives. And this competency is as important for any leaders, regardless of their gender. So to go back on some of the factors that might reinforce this myth, which Krista kind of pointed out, well, Indra Nooyi and Sheryl Sandberg kind of pointed out as well. It seems like the higher burnout rates that we see in executives women is not because they are less resilient, but more because of societal expectation that still place a disproportionate caregiving and emotional labor burden on women, adding to their overall stress. So even when employed full-time, we know that women still spend significantly more hours on unpaid domestic work and emotional work, taking care of the family, than men on average. So looking at all of that in terms of the ability to handle the stress that comes with a leadership role, it seems our data or the general research point out to not being a capability problem, but more a demand problem that we put onto women executives.
So for myth number 3, this one is women are less decisive or less likely to take risks than men. And for this one, we looked at 2 different scales. We looked at dutiful and cautious. And so for the first part with dutiful, women executives, we found that they actually are as willing to act independently and to disagree as men executives. However, where might this myth be coming from? Well, we do know that traditional gender stereotypes often associate decisiveness and risk-taking with masculinity, while femininity is linked to nurturing and caring about others. And so these societal expectations can shape perceptions about women and their willingness to push back against authority, even if it's not true. Confirmation bias can also perpetuate this myth. So once the stereotype that women are less decisive or risk-taking is established, it could be perpetuated through confirmation bias, where people notice and remember the instances that support their stereotype while ignoring the instances that contradict it. The underrepresentation of women in leadership roles can also perpetuate both this myth and the confirmation bias. So if we say, hey, women are less likely to take risks and go for a position of leadership. And so then that's why there's not as many women leaders. So when there are fewer women in visible positions of authority, it can reinforce these stereotypes about their abilities. And this ends up being a vicious cycle that has no basis in actual data. Unwillingness to manage upward can hinder leadership potential for everyone. And executives with high dutiful scores tend to be more indecisive, which negatively impacts leadership effectiveness. This characteristic both affects men and women equally with minimal gender differences. And one example here of a man who was indecisive and not willing to push back against authority and act independently is actually Ken Lay, the founder of Enron. And despite growing evidence of accounting irregularities and questionable financial practices within Enron and his team, he chose to align himself with the company's executives and their aggressive strategies rather than pushing back to independently address these issues. So he often deferred to the company's CFO and other top executives who were promoting risky accounting practices rather than push back against them. And of course, Enron was a huge disaster. Now, the other aspect we're looking at is cautious. Women executives actually, turns out, are just as risk tolerant as men executives. And how we're defining cautious, again, is risk averse, resistant to change, and slow to make decisions. It is a fact that men are more likely to participate in high risk activities like extreme sports or aggressive investing, tending to do more risky activities. It also contributes to the fact that women are more likely to live longer than men because men tend to be more risk behaviors. But instead of being universally less risk taking, men and women actually differ in how they take risks and how visible those risks are. So men's risks tend to be visible and immediate. So extreme sports, high stakes investing, doing things that might put their life at risk. Whereas women's risks tend to be more strategic and calculated. So thinking about taking risks with career changes, ethical decisions, or long-term investments. So in the workplace in particular, however, men and women are just as likely to take or tolerate risks. And one example of this is Ruth Porat. She is a CFO of Alphabet Inc. in Google. And Ruth Porat has made impactful decisions that have shaped the financial landscapes of one of the largest technology companies in the world. She played a key role in Google's restructuring and has been decisive in implementing financial strategies that promote growth and innovation. Her advocacy for diversity in finance and technology also showcases her commitment to challenging the status quo. So again, the risk-taking, being strategic and calculated, is actually highly beneficial. And Ruth Porat, as a woman CFO of a Fortune 500 company, is a wonderful example of this calculated strategic risk-taking.
Up next is myth number 4. Women are less strategic or innovative than men. So this stereotype can be reinforced by the fact that women are less likely to hold strategic decision-making roles. When you look at the C-suite, we don't see that many women being CEOs or CFOs. Oftentimes, they will sit at the CMO or CHRO role. In addition, women accounted for just 13% of all startup founders in 2023. So again, here, this lack of representation in top roles can create a false perception that women are less strategic or innovative. But our data suggests that this stereotype is a lot more myth than fact. And what I mean by that is we did see some gender differences in one of the scale. So the first scale that we looked at is the HPI Inquisitive Scale. And this scale measures the degree to which someone is curious, creative, and kind of focusing on the big picture, long-term thinking. And we do see some small differences here. Again, here it's a moderate effect size, so the impact on a day-to-day basis and among like the general executive population is not big. But I want to point out that we do see a small differences where men executives tend to score slightly higher on this scale. It might be because of the role that they're in, but basically that's a small difference that we saw. However, this psychological characteristic, inquisitiveness, supports performance equally for men and women at the executive level. And when I say that we don't actually see the impact, that's because we could also look at competencies rating. And we'll also see with some 360 ratings. So although there are some small differences at the personality characteristic level, when we ask people to rate women and men executives on the competencies of driving strategy and driving innovation, we don't see any differences. So it might be a small difference in terms of their scores, but from an observer's standpoint, people actually don't see this difference. And both these two competencies are equally important for supporting executive performance for both genders. We could also look at women and men's leadership versatility. So this data set is composed of 360 scores by peers, direct report, and direct supervisors on a leader's ability to demonstrate just the right amount of behaviors on 4 dimensions. And one of them is being strategic. So when we compare women and men executives on their scores on that dimension, they also don't differ. And so all in all, although we do see some slight differences in the personality scores in our data, all of the data points that we have suggest that this stereotype is more myth than fact. And this is what science is, right? It's never black and white. We want to present you the full data with transparencies.
So another aspect beyond just the characteristics of personality, it's perceptions of how people perceive leaders. And there is also this myth that women must adopt a masculine leadership characteristic to succeed. And this is actually a myth. And also it depends on how we say success. So it really is a common misconception that the best leaders are authoritative, direct, assertive to the point of aggression, unfeeling, take charge, or that very dominant authoritarian style. We tend to associate these characteristics with masculine leadership styles, and we view males who have these leadership styles as more positive than females who have the same style, that authoritarian, dominant type of leadership style. So studies have actually shown that women who display these more dominant characteristics are viewed more negatively than men with the same characteristics. So for example, men are oftentimes described as taking charge, while women are described as overly aggressive. Men would be described as a strong leader, while women would be described as a bossy leader. So same characteristics, but we tend to use more negative descriptors for women. But in fact, the truth of the matter is this type of leadership style is detrimental to both men and women alike. Even if we view men with these characteristics as more positive and women as more negative, it's still not helpful. And in fact, the scores between men and women on these scales did not differ. So men and women are equally likely to have these detrimental characteristics. An important point here is that these data are useful for challenging our ingrained notions of leadership. Most of us learn about leadership from the leaders we work for, and that's not always the best education. Implicit leader theory suggests that we are learning all the time from the people who lead us, and leaders in our mind should be the people who have led us before. But I think it's time to rethink dominance in leadership. The past belief is research has suggested that dominance might help men in leadership roles but hurt women. But our findings actually show that this forcefulness characteristic did not boost performance for either men or women. In fact, it lowered performance for both. And so because men and women executives score similarly across these key personality characteristics, we should rethink keeping on promoting people who are trying to take charge. We should rethink what we consider good leadership. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So as we're finishing up these 5 myths, I think we have proven today that women are equally as ambitious as men. This is a myth. We've also talked about how women can actually handle high stress leadership roles just as good as men, but we also have to consider the additional pressure we're putting on women. Like Indra Nuri said, she has to work twice as hard to prove her similar ambition as men. We've also talked about how women are not less decisive, and they are just as likely to take risks as men, just maybe in different aspects. We talked about the nuance that women are less strategic or innovative than men. We saw that there's small personality differences, very, very tiny, but they're actually not meaningful in the real world. And from a perception perspective, women are just as likely to drive strategy, drive innovation as men. And then finally, we've actually challenged the myth that women must adopt masculine leadership characteristics to succeed. In fact, we've shown that these masculine leadership characteristics are bad for performance. And so we should not only challenge that myth, we also need to change the conversation about what makes a good leader.
So to help us transition from, the very detailed data points that we looked at in our research, I also want to kind of take a step, I want all of us to take a step back and think of what does that mean? And basically, the best way to summarize our findings, but also what more and more studies are consistently demonstrating, is that there's more diversity among men and among women themselves than between women and men. And another way to say this is, men and women are a lot more similar when you look at when you compare both groups, but when really where the difference sits is among the variety of behaviors, and men themselves will differ a lot, will have a lot of variety in the type of behaviors that they will demonstrate, and it's the same hold true for women as well. So there are as many organized or pragmatic or strategic men than there are women. And this is what more and more studies show. So let me elaborate a bit more about that. People will often overemphasize between group differences, men versus women, while underestimating within group variability, the differences among individuals within the same group. And why does that happen? Well, our brain likes to keep things simple. So one of the bias that is in action for our brain is the categorization bias. Our brain likes to simplify complex information by creating categories and then exaggerating kind of generalization and also exaggerating differences. So when we compare groups, we focus more on what makes them distinct from each other rather than how much they have in common. Parents also do that with their own children. It's well documented. And also, we cannot ignore the impact that stereotypes and social norms have. These are cultural narratives that reinforce perceived gender differences, making them seem larger than what they really are.
So one thing we'd love to leave with you today is the goal for this session is not to get you to hire more women for the sake of creating equity. That is not our goal here, and we would actually discourage you from doing that. The bigger question to focus on is, are we appointing the most effective leaders, or are unconscious biases leading us to overlook great talent? So you can see this model here. Hogan categorizes leadership in a couple of different ways. One way is through the lens of emergence, or who gets promoted. So people who are able to get promoted into positions of leadership usually stand out from the crowd. They're your politicians, they're your self-promoters, your marketers. They're the people who are very charismatic. The problem with looking at these type of people as leaders and as people who to promote is they're not always the effective leaders. Leadership emergence, or the ability to emerge as a leader into a role of leadership, is different from people who are effective leaders. So people who are effective leaders are the ones who can build and maintain a high-performing team. And this is a completely different skill set than getting noticed. Losing sight of what makes a leader effective means that they are likely missing out on good talent. And so the focus actually should be more on how can we support those leaders who are more effective. If you notice, I haven't mentioned gender differences between men and women, because with personality, as Anne-Marie pointed out, there are equal opportunities for leaders to be emergent. There's equal opportunities for them to be effective. And so as we're looking at this chart here, something to keep in mind is if we're only focusing on people who are those forceful leaders who show up and take charge, this is going to be a mistaken appointment for a leader. A lot of times companies miss the effective leaders. The people are so focused on building their teams, but they're not spending their time politicking and performing. So this is the area that we should actually be looking more at to see if there are greater high potentials in the effective leaders. We know that like the good appointments are the ones who tend to overlap, and studies have shown that there's only 10% overlap typically in leader emergence versus effectiveness. So what Dr. Hogan and what we are proposing is that we should be focusing a bit more on leader effectiveness, looking at those characteristics that not only are showing up for getting promoted or getting people noticed, but we should be looking at the characteristics of people who can actually lead well and build and maintain high-performing teams. So as we're moving forward, we would like to share some solutions for appointing these best leaders. Again, talking about effective leadership, the goal isn't to balance numbers. It's not to promote more women for the sake of having more women in positions of leadership. Our goal here is to appoint the best leaders. And what we're saying is that we're missing out by only promoting males. We're missing out on promoting some really good performers that are females. So with the 10% CEOs, women CEOs, that means that 90% of women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are men. There's a good chance that we're missing some really good high-performing leaders. Leadership gives us an evolutionary advantage. Coordinating a group is very difficult. Getting people to work together for a common goal is a real skill. And if we zoom out to think about the success or failure of nations, it comes down to leaders. The best nations, the highest performing nations, the nations who are most long-standing have good leaders, and the ones that fail tend to have bad leaders. So in essence, good effective leadership makes us more effective in accomplishing goals and getting ahead and having our organizations perform, and bad leadership is a recipe for failure. And the problem here is that most organizations hire leaders who consider themselves more than the team. And so we should be focusing on leaders who consider the team, because leadership is ultimately a resource for the group. So as we're considering how to enhance the quality of leadership, what we truly need is to create an environment that allows great leaders to emerge and be appointed. And so we have really broken this out into two categories for your consideration. And category one is fair and data-driven talent practices. So this focuses on evidence-based, bias-reducing methods in leadership selection, evaluation, and development to support all good leaders, all high-performing leaders, all leaders who can build and maintain a high-performing team to be able to get those promotions, and not just the ones who are really good at self-promoting, which tends to be males, as we have noticed through the statistics. So we want to stay away from the trends that are always shifting. We hear something, that's diversity, equity, inclusion. That's, a buzzword. Or we hear about grit. Grit was another thing that's a buzzword. But we're trying to stay away from these interesting trends, which are very interesting and catchy, but we would recommend that organizations focus more on the universally relevant behaviors to leadership effectiveness when you're thinking about how to achieve gender equity in leadership for high performance. We are all influenced by biases. It's crucial to implement guardrails to mitigate the impact of biases. So one thing you can do is remove gender cues when reviewing resumes. You can also use validated personality assessments because it doesn't really differentiate between men and women for leadership characteristics. Another thing that you can do is implement structured interview with clear behavioral criteria of low versus high mastery of the job role. Finally, you can also implement small nudges and gender neutral language in job postings and performance evaluations. This can significantly increase the number of capable women to apply for leadership roles. So in a moment, we're going to share some specific examples of how this can be done. So that's the first category, is making sure that you are, when selecting talent, when you're trying to promote talent internally or even externally, that you're using fair and data-driven talent practices. The second thing to consider is the systemic and policy-based equity solutions. So not only looking at the talent themselves, but also creating the environment where we can support high-performing leaders, both male and female. So supporting equity with policies like parental leave, childcare mentorship, and sponsorship can be make the difference for a parent to be able to take a position of leadership instead of having to worry about childcare and have that additional burden and create extra stress for them. Additional or organizational talent audits at the organizational level is very important. So as we know, personality is equal opportunity, but hiring and promotion practices are not necessarily fair. And so it's really important that you consider gender rates at the organizational level. If you are seeing that you're promoting 90% males and only 10% females into positions of leadership, you need to rethink how you are hiring, because you're going to be missing some really good performers at the female level. And it's a good chance that you're also promoting some bad performers from a male perspective. And so we would like to also encourage organizations to focus on structural solutions and change, to look at the organizational level, what you can do, and not just on the individual level, because we know that individual level, talking to people about feedback, promoting one woman is not going to change the entire system. Looking at using personality assessment across the entire organization is actually going to be the thing that moves the needle. And so I know I've talked conceptually quite a lot right now, but for this next part, we've talked about a lot of the myths, and we've talked about conceptually what we could do. We would like to leave you today with some really practical solutions for being able to make a change in your organization. This is something that we find is very important. As you saw, we talked about Joyce, Dr. Joyce Hogan. She was all about implementing. She was all about practical solutions. So let's talk. We're going to give you 4 different case studies for ways that you could consider implementing some changes at your organizations to promote more gender equality, but most importantly, to promote good leaders, hiring and supporting good leaders, effective leaders. So Anne-Marie, will you share a couple with us first?
Yeah, thank you so much, Krista. And just like you've mentioned, this is where we find, this is like the most interesting part probably of the presentation, because we actually take the insights and look at how we can actually make a difference. And sometimes it's very small changes that can be implemented, but they can have a huge impact when they're implemented at a system level, at an organizational level. So we have some case studies today. Some of them leverage Hogan solutions, but we also want to highlight some of the amazing things and very effective strategies that other organizations have implemented and have seen results with. So the first case study that we'll be sharing is about a healthcare organization that Hogan started to work with. So this is a healthcare company. They have hospitals, and basically they were having some not so great business results, and they really wanted to improve their practices for identifying and developing physician executives throughout the organization. So they really struggle with leadership effectiveness. The 360, the 360 and the engagement survey results were not great. They were also seeing quite a big gender imbalance in their managerial pipeline following an organizational audit that they did. And this is quite interesting because in the healthcare system, it's usually it's quite there's a bigger proportion of women compared to men that work in the healthcare system. But really, as you look through moving up the ladder and up the leadership levels, you see a bigger proportion of men emerging as leaders. And so for this specific organization, they actually had in their leadership in the physician executive category or level, they had 80% men compared to 20% women. So our recommendation was to implement our a validated, adverse impact-free, personality-based predictive leadership profile into their leadership promotion, their leadership selection as well, but also their development process. And so what we recommended was for them to implement leader basis. So leader basis is our most well-researched and validated predictive leadership success profile. And this solution is really great because it provides you an in-depth preview of someone's executive leadership capabilities. It really helps you to answer questions such as, will this person be capable of effectively leading a team and delivering results? What type of obstacles based on their personal profile will they face? And will they be motivated to do a good job? And we know, we've done tons of research on that. We know that organizations who implement this oftentimes start to see, well, not oftentimes, all of the time they start to see their business outcomes and success kind of go up when they really focus on these selection criteria for new leaders. And so this leadership success profiles focus on universal leadership behaviors like optimism, self-confidence, consideration and structure, really helping drive team coordination, motivation, and effective decision-making. Conversely, so we kind of select in, or we want to see more people who score higher on these day-to-day scores. We want to avoid, or we want to bring to leaders' awareness some important risks to manage when they are in a leadership position. And these are the 4 leadership behaviors or risks to manage. So excitable, being moody and volatile, cautious, being afraid to make a mistake, kind of going into analysis paralysis for doctors. They don't want to fail, they don't want to make a mistake, don't want to take a risk. Reserved, who's being kind of socially aloof and indifferent, not communicating with their team under stress. And diligent, which is all about being a micromanager and being kind of inflexible in how you approach problems. And so this solution was really great for this client's goal and context, because it gave them a fit recommendation showing how kind of the natural behavioral preferences of someone fit with the requirement or the required behaviors that a leadership role asks for. It also enables them to compare everyone side by side on the same capabilities and characteristics. And this is really important because side-by-side comparison on the same traits ensure that you'll make better decisions. It will be more fair, it will be more objective, will reduce bias, and it will really reveal kind of what are the strengths and the weaknesses of individual, but also about like your bigger leadership pool. And for people who are joining the organization, joining this company, it also provided them with a set of questions that they can use in structured interviews. So that was kind of the best fit for that. And just to share more about how the solution was quite interesting with the goals that they had. So yes, they wanted to improve business outcome, but gender diversity and gender balance was also a problem. So what we did is we had all of their leaders complete leader basis. So complete our 3 core assessment and score on the success profile. And what we found was not very surprising. So the distribution in terms of the fit levels was about evenly split across the fit level. So about a third was low fit, third was moderate, and a third high. And so basically, what it tells us is, in other words, because they're not using an objective or consistent selection process, they were essentially choosing leaders like flipping a coin. And so when we saw these results, we discussed with them, and we decided to, we recommended, but also we agreed together that a clear strategic goal for them was for in the future to aim to cut the proportion of low fit leaders by about half over the next few years. And that simple shift would naturally increase the share of moderate and high fit leaders in their pipeline. But here's the powerful part. So even though we're not looking at gender or making sure that we're kind of favoring women compared to men, we're really just focusing on the important leadership behaviors. Because both gender in the are equally likely to score high on leader basis, we just focusing on the fit, that would enable them to have significant gender diversity gains. So when we kind of modeled what would be the impact just on focusing on selecting higher fit leaders, they would see an increase in the type of women leaders who would emerge and who would be appointed as leaders, while maintaining, if not improving, the business outcomes. So basically, this solution was really great for helping them reduce potential selection bias, promote high potential talent, and support more effective leadership regardless of gender. And we have tons of data in different industries. And when we looked at leader basis and its outcome in the healthcare system with other past clients, we know that it's quite likely that they will see an improvement in leadership quality and also in their business outcomes. So these are some of the data that we have from our past work with other clients in the healthcare industry. So we know that leaders who score higher on leader basis score higher on overall performance. They're more effective at building team, energizing staff. They're less likely to emit a they're less likely to behave in a counterproductive way, like being late or being hurtful to other people, having like making hurtful comments. And we also know that the units that they lead have higher patient loyalty ratings. So the result that they can expect from implementing this solution is not only a more diverse leadership pipeline that's driven by science, free from unconscious bias, but also delivering impact on people, clients, and greater performance. Now on to you, Krista.
Sounds good. I know that we are almost at the time for the performance. We want to leave some time for questions. So these next case studies are pretty quick. As I mentioned before, Carol Tomey, the CFO of UPS, Indra Nooyi, the CEO of PepsiCo, and Sheryl Sandberg, the former COO of Facebook, all mentioned the importance of mentoring to support women's ambition. And so this case study, Anne-Marie shared a wonderful case study about selecting, internal selection and external selection for performance. But once women get into positions of leadership, or even as we're looking internally for the company, how we can support women into developing them into positions of leadership, mentorship is a very important structural change that we can make across our organizations. So for this one, this is actually a company within Asia, and they had a cross-company initiative that paired 15 aspiring female managers. It was their high potential group with 15 board level members across their organization, across organizations, and each mentor and mentee assigned a different pairing to maximize learning and impact. And so this was a 6-month program. They had a kickoff session. They actually used Hogan as part of their group feedbacks to help develop their self-aware understanding and help develop the 15 aspiring managers' self-awareness about their strengths and weaknesses, and to help develop their ambition. And so then they had their one-on-one mentoring session with the mentees. And it's basically, they wanted to empower these mentees to support them as they're transitioning into leadership roles. So they encouraged executives to reflect on the internal systems of support and sponsorship, and they provided that support as well. And so then they had a final wrap-up session over this 6-month course of the project. So this was another way that you can consider helping to support women once you've chosen these high performers to help them be more successful in their roles. So Anne-Marie has 2 more case studies.
So next is about something very simple that you can implement today. So oftentimes organizations that want to kind of improve gender, they want to have like a more balanced and a more diverse leadership pool. Oftentimes, one of the obstacles that they will encounter is they don't receive any application from people from an underrepresented backgrounds. And one very effective way one strategy that organization can implement is adding some nudges. So this is an example of Culture Amp's job posting. And so in their job posting and in their job descriptions, they strongly encourage applicants from underrepresented backgrounds to submit their candidacy, even if they don't meet all requirements, because research has shown that people who come from the overrepresented background, or like the majority type of socio-demographical group, they don't hesitate. They will apply if they meet 6 out of 10 criteria. However, people who come from underrepresented backgrounds or who are in minority groups, they will hesitate more and will only apply if they have 10 or a 9 out of 10 of the criteria. So that's something that you can do. Google had also implemented that back in early 2010s with their promotion process. So basically in the performance review, when you did a performance review at Google, at the end of the performance review, when you complete the form, you can self-nominate for a promotion. Basically, you raise your hand and you say, I'm ready and I want to take a next step in my career. And when they did an organizational audit, they had found out that not as many women would raise their hand or self-nominate. And so one of the things that they did was send an email to all of the female employees and also include kind of a little note in their performance review form to encourage them to apply as well, because they were not receiving as many self-nomination. So that's something quite simple that you can implement. And last, one other case study that we want to share is about intellectual property law firm. Fish and Richardson. So back in 2016, there were about 400 attorneys, and they brought in a head of talent management to implement different strategies to advance diversity among the leadership level. And so what the head of talent management developed was a D&I strategic plan that was highly written with a lot of significant input from the management committee to really maximize the buy-in. And I want to highlight a few strategies that they implemented that had great impact. So one of them is the adding a bias checker in performance and promotion discussion. And so basically they had their National Diversity Chair and Women's Empower Chair join all evaluation and promotion meetings. And these two people, they would listen in for in-the-moment biases that were happening when they were entering the deliberation discussion. So an example of a bias that they have shared publicly that they've heard in performance review discussion is when a reviewer would discuss the performance of a male associate and say, oh, that guy is such a go-getter. He's so assertive. That's so great. And then in the next breath, the same reviewer was expressing the complete opposite for a female associate, stating, gosh, she's so aggressive. It's kind of off-putting. We need to get her some coaching. So basically, it was in real time feedback for people to say, hey, is it possible right now that we're having an unconscious bias? So that's one thing that they did. The other thing that they did is at some point they had unconscious bias training for everyone. And one of the outcomes of the unconscious bias session was the launch of a new process for structured interviews, especially regarding their on-campus recruiting programs for summer associates. Big firms like this are oftentimes known for kind of just repeating and having kind of a cookie type like a very specific profile that they look for. And so basically they implemented they implemented a structured interview based on key competencies to kind of counter some of the biases. And yeah, they saw some great outcomes from that. So wanted to share that. And I want to end by highlighting that, when combined, these strategies, nudges in job descriptions, bias interrupters in performance reviews, and implementing structured interviews, they do lay a powerful foundation for more fair talent decisions. But their impact can also be amplified if they're paired with some data. So they can also be paired with some personality assessment to kind of ensure that everyone and the right people not only get a fair shot, but they're the best suited leaders to rise to the top.
Great. One other thing to mention is that with the leader basis, they actually do offer structured interview questions. So you don't even have to design new questions. You can actually just use that within the report. But the last thing we'd like to leave you with is, we know this isn't easy. If it were easy, we would have solved this problem decades ago. But by proactively focusing on multiple strategies, focusing on leader performance rather than trying to move the needle with gender, we can create more inclusive and empowered leadership for everyone. So we know that leadership effectiveness is shaped by personality, culture, and opportunity. And the point here is not to just remove barriers so that any old person can get up to the top. It's actually about valuing diverse talents and potential and making it harder for lower performers to get to the top, and making it easier for women and others who may have not gotten the opportunity to have a position of leadership, making it easier for them to succeed. And so I think one of the fears is that if we start, trying to increase women in leadership, won't that take away jobs from men? Well, we hope it takes jobs away from low performing men, right? We hope we want to make it more difficult for low performers, both men and women, to get to the top, and give opportunities for high performing men and women to get to the top. So using data-driven decision tools can increase the quality of appointed leaders, which benefits everyone. Everyone suffers when low performers are at the top of organizations. Their teams are unhappy, organizations don't perform as well. But when you have really high performing leaders who are good at supporting their teams, it benefits everyone. So that's what we'd like to leave you with today.